Hey folks, I have a big long list of books that have been published within the last month, and as usual, all the books on this list are published either by independent publishers or university presses, and the reason I round up those books every month to share with you here is because books from indie publishers and small presses and university presses tend to get a little bit less publicity than books that are published by large corporate publishers. And so since I'm already looking these books up for my own reading list, I thought I would come on and share them with you here to kind of boost their visibility just a little bit. I think that there is hopefully a book on this list for every kind of reader, but these are in fact the books that caught my eye, and I tend towards quirky books, maybe books that sound like there's something I have never seen before or read before. So this list does skew a little bit towards my reading taste, but I try to keep a good variety here for everybody. But there are so many more books out there that are being published every single week by small presses and university presses and big presses, and you all know this. You have huge long reading lists too. So again, these are all books that have been published in August 2023, and they are really in no particular order here, just kind of on the list as I saw them and added them to my tracking document. First up, we have a novel from Biblioasis, which is a Canadian publisher, and the novel is called The Full Moon Whaling Chronicles, and it's by Jason Guriel. And you'll see what I mean by adding kind of quirky, interesting, unique sounding books to this list. So this is set in 2070, and it is a novel written in rhyming couplets. It's the story of a near future planet Earth that is beset with rising tides. Newfoundland has vanished underwater. Tokyo is a new Venice. And we meet the main character, Kay, who is a literature student who is seeking a reclusive author of a cult classic YA novel about teenage werewolves. And it's described as a mashup of Moby Dick, The Lord of the Rings, Byron, cyberpunk, Swamp Thing, and Teen Wolf. And this is actually a follow-up to another novel that the author wrote called Forgotten Work. From Red Hen Press is a novel called Island Man, and it's by Joanne Skerrett. And this is the story of a man who travels with his estranged father to the island of Dominica in 2017, and they travel there together to scatter the ashes of the main character's mother. But they arrive just in time for Hurricane Maria. And the devastation of the storm really mirrors the interior turmoil and relationship turmoil that this father and son are experiencing as they are getting to know one another better. And I think there are some family secrets that are revealed and generations of trauma that come to light. From Akashic Books is the newest addition to their Noir series called Cleveland Noir. And this is edited by Miesha, Headen, and Michael Ruhlman. And this is a series that now has well over 100 books in the series. I've mentioned it before. It's all noir. They're collections of noir short stories, but each book is set within a particular city or sometimes a state or like a region, and they feature cities from all over the world. And it's just such a fascinating, cool series, and they're always edited by someone who has deep intimate knowledge of that particular city. And so these stories really reflect all the different angles and communities within these cities and regions. And so this newest edition is Cleveland. From Unnamed Press is a novel called Underjungle, and it's by James Sturz. And this, again, is another example of a quirky, hard to describe novel, but this is the story of an intelligent life form called the YC, I think is how you say it. I don't know. I'm not sure how you would actually say it, but that lives in the deep depths of the ocean. And this intelligent life form has developed a civilization where there are multiple groups, like multiple tribes. I think like the 7 different tribes that each have their own like dialect and culture. And then one day, one of the members of one of the tribes encounters a corpse. And I assume that means a human corpse that has, but maybe I shouldn't assume, that just shows my human-centric sensibility that I assume from the description this means a human corpse. I don't actually know that because it doesn't say. They encounter a corpse that has floated down to the bottom of the ocean. And the news of this crazy discovery travels, and it has impacts that reverberate across generations of these families and communities. And from the description, it says, buoyed by humor and tinged with the unshakable melancholy of loss is the existential question that forever ties the novel to our human experience. What is our purpose? From Tin House, the great independent publisher, is The Museum of Human History by Rebekah Bergman. And one blurb for this speculative and fable-like novel is from Samantha Hunt, who wrote The Seas, I think. It calls Rebekah Bergman the daughter of Mary Shelley. I think you'll understand that reference when I describe the novel here. So this is about an 8-year-old girl named Maeve who has fallen into a coma after nearly drowning. And as time passes, it becomes clear that Maeve is not aging. And years go by, and a wide cast of characters become obsessed with Maeve, believing that she holds the answers to some of life's mysteries, including Evangeline, who is Maeve's identical twin, and who I assume from this description is aging while Maeve does not. From Melville House is a novel called Oh God, the Sun Goes by David Connor. I have to get a little dramatic when I read that, because when you hear the premise, you will understand. This is a surreal novel in which the sun has disappeared from the sky. And there's an unnamed narrator who travels across the desert of the American Southwest. And this narrator is searching for an astrophysicist who might have answers about the sun's whereabouts. So unfortunately, I read a review that I think mentions something that happens midway through the novel that is kind of major, like a major twist. So I'm not going to reveal it here, but if this sounds at all intriguing to you, don't read anything more about it, because it sounds like there's a major swerve at some point in the novel and it shifts into something else entirely. From Transit Lounge, which I think is an Australian publisher, is a novel by Eugen Bacon called Serengotti. And this is perhaps perfect for Straya September, brand new Australian novel. The novel begins with the main character, Chanzu, and Chanzu's personal life is completely falling apart. And so Chanzu, who's a computer programmer, makes the decision to go work on a programming project in an African migrant outpost in rural Australia. And this outpost is called Seringgati. And the community in Seringgati is a mix of cultures, but most of the people have left war-torn countries and are orphans and widows and have experienced extreme trauma, and they're very mistrustful of newcomers like Chanzi. And Forward's review, so Forward is an online and a print magazine that focuses only on independent reviews of books from independent publishers. And it says, a twisting plot, a setting rife with potential danger, and a past full of its own skeletons all build to a head in Serengotti. From Three Fields Books, which I think is one of the publishing imprints from the University of Illinois. So Three Fields Books is a nonfiction book called Juliet and Marquette, A New History of the 1673 Expedition. And this is a historical account that sounds riveting. It has great blurbs saying this is a really great history that expands and updates the story of Juliet and Marquette's 17th century expedition through North America, and that it corrects and updates previous scholarship on the subject to place the explorers within a better understood and better researched context of the region's very diverse Native American communities and also the vast natural world and wilderness that they journeyed through. And a review again from Forward says, Juliet and Marquette is an engrossing history book that covers an early European expedition into lands unfamiliar to its explorers. It is respectful in analyzing the not yet colonized cultures they encountered. I just thought that sounded I don't include a ton of nonfiction because my eyes aren't immediately drawn to those books. That's something I need to get better at, but that one sounded pretty cool. From MIT Press is a short story anthology called More Voices from the Radium Age, and this is edited by Joshua Glenn, and this is my introduction to what apparently is a series called Radium Age, and the series focuses on bringing together both well-known and lesser-known writers of proto-science fiction. So the stories in this volume, for example, range in publication year from 1901 to 1926, and they include sci-fi pioneers such as H.G. Wells, but also include two of the genre's first female writers, including E. Nesbit and May Sinclair. And the covers are so cool, so go check this series out. I have a feeling that there are some folks watching that this will be right up their alley. Maybe you already know about it and I'm just out of the loop. From 3 Mile Harbor Press is a poetry collection called American Eclipse, and it's by Kateri Kosick. And I think this collection uses the image and the event of an actual celestial eclipse to explore other kinds of eclipses. So eclipses in relationships, in politics, in climate and the environment. So using both real and metaphorical shadow and darkness, and exploring how that darkness, especially when it's an unusual occurrence, can heighten the senses and heighten our attention to detail. From World Editions is a novel called We Are Light, and this is by Gerda Blees, and it's translated by Michelle Hutchison. And this is about a community of women who attempt to live without food and exist only on light and love. When this proves fatal to one of the residents trying to live on light and love alone, the remaining residents become suspects in a criminal case. So this has been on my list almost since I started this channel because I mentioned it in a video last year. I was doing a video on upcoming releases and I only realized while I was filming that this book was coming out in August 2023 and not August 2022. So I can finally say this book from World Editions has been published and you can buy it. From Game Over Books is a collection called Until Tender, and it's by Sam Slupsky. And this is a debut collection in which the writer invites the reader to join them for supper. These aren't just poems, these are also essays and recipes too, and that sounds super cool. From Soft Skull Press is another novel called Liquid Snakes, and this is by Stephen Kearse, and this is about a biochemist turned coffee shop owner who is grieving his stillborn daughter who was killed likely by chemicals leaching into the ground from a plant that the government is hiding in Black neighborhoods. This character, as he is grieving, begins daily injections of a lethal snake venom, and this is somehow associated with the coffee and the coffee shop. Somehow. I don't know how, but it is. Meanwhile, in another narrative thread, 2 Black epidemiologists investigate a mysterious Black substance that has killed a local high school girl. And Kirkus says, a dry, devilish amalgam of science fiction, whodunit, horror, social satire, and cautionary tale. From Unnamed Press is a novel called What's Mine by Betty Adrians. And this is the story of 2 men who each believe that one single apartment in Amsterdam is rightfully theirs. So you have Lewis, who currently lives in the apartment, who inherited it from his mother. And then you have William, who arrives from Oxford, who believes the apartment should be his inheritance from his father. And the 2 men refuse to come to an agreement, refuse to share. And what ensues is apparently a humorous and heartbreaking tale that asks the question, can what's mine be yours too? From Europa Editions is a novel called Pet by Catherine Chaiji. And this is a suspenseful psychological thriller that's about a 13-year-old, nope, it's not. It's about a 12-year-old girl who longs to be her teacher's pet. And then a thief starts targeting the school, and this 12-year-old, whose name is Justine, starts to believe that something is not quite right with the situation. This is set in New Zealand in the 1980s, and the blurb compares it to Marilyn Robinson's Housekeeping, which is one of my favorite books. It compares it to Housekeeping in that it's a classic portrait of childhood betrayal. From Unsolicited Press is a novel called The Ballad of Two Sisters, and it's by Darcy Schumer. And I'm gonna read the description because it's kind of hard to wrap my mind around what this is really about, but it sounds compelling. So at the center of The Ballad of Two Sisters are Stella and Helen, two sisters who die on the same day. One fragile and one strong, the sisters confront the troubles of the past and the uncertainty of the future as they seek connection, joy, and completion. Though at times circuitous, the paths the sisters travel ultimately lead them back to each other until finally they can never be parted. I believe this takes place in the Midwest, which sounds good to me. And one blurb describes it as a dark and haunting family saga. Then we have a novel from Tory House Press, and Tory House Press is described as the Intermountain West's only nonprofit environmental book publisher. So all of their books have some sort of environmental message. So the novel is called What Falls Away, and it's by Karen Anderson. And this is the story of Cassandra, who gets pregnant at 17 and is cast out of her community by its religious leaders. And after nearly 40 years, she returns to her rural Utah hometown, and she meets a young man with an uncanny resemblance to the father of the child she was forced to give up for adoption. And it says she must reconcile with her past in the fiercely beautiful landscapes that shaped her. From Milkweed is a poetry collection called Ice, and it's by David Keplinger. And it says, in a careful examination of personal and collective histories, David Keplinger's Ice indexes the findings from memory's slow melt, stories and faces we've forgotten, bones hidden in frost. And I believe one or more of the poems actually features a prehistoric wolf that is uncovered as ice begins to melt due to climate change, which sounds very fascinating. From City Lights Books is a novel called LOD Man, and I'm not sure exactly how to say the title, but it's by Ebru Ojen, and the translators are Aaron Aji and Selin Goksesu. This is the author's first novel to be translated into English and published in the US, and it says that it's told in very short chapters with raw and very arresting, startling prose. And it's the story of a Kurdish family living in a small village in a desolate region of Turkey. And the family lives in this assigned lodging, it's assigned teacher's lodging, also known as a logement. And one day, the main character, Selma, her husband just walks out and abandons her with their 3 children during an epic snowstorm. And this throws Selma into a desperate rage. That's all I need to know from there to be interested in this one. From Europa Editions is a novel called A Vulga Tale by Güzel Yakina, translated by Polly Gannon. This is an award-winning novel that is now translated into English, and it takes place in a German enclave, a German village in Russia on the banks of the Volga River. And it spans the last years of the 19th century and into the first decades of the 20th century. And it is a sweeping epic and family drama that tells the story of Jacob, who falls in love with a girl who lives on the other side of the Volga from where he lives. Their relationship has devastating consequences, and it's a family story, but it's also the story of a people and a nation in the midst of war and corruption. And it won all sorts of prizes. From Zank Books is a short story collection by George Singleton called The Curious Lives of Nonprofit Martyrs. This is described as brilliant, absurd, and perfect for fans of George Saunders. The author is a legendary absurdist writer, and these are 17 stories that feature characters and themes that are all loosely linked, all revealing the lives of small town South Carolina. These are very funny, or sound like it from the description. One brief example that I'll give is a story featuring a group of old men who meet at a diner for their regular meetings of their group called Veterans Against Guns in North America. From Milkweed is a book I have very much been anticipating called The Quickening by Elizabeth Rush. And this is a nonfiction book documenting the voyage of 57 scientists and crew to the Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica. And it's a book about the science, about Antarctica, about climate change, but this is also part memoir. And it dives into the much more personal journey of the author as she considers what it means to bring a child into the world at this time. From Scarlett Tanager Books is a novel called Hamlet's Children, and this is by Richard Kluger, who's an award-winning writer, and this is the portrait of a Danish family under Nazi occupation in World War II. It starts out with a 13-year-old American boy, Tory, who is orphaned and is sent to live with his mother's family in Denmark in the summer of 1939, and he doesn't really know them at all, but he's sent to live with them and dealing with the trauma of that new life. And within months, Nazi forces overwhelm Denmark, and the Danish people agree to feed and service Hitler's army, basically in order to kind of save themselves. So this is a story of one boy and one family trying to survive during wartime in a nation that is dealing with a profound moral dilemma and having to make unthinkable compromises. Oh, this next book and its cover, oh my goodness. You Cannot Forbid the Flower from Tolson Books, and this is by Elizabeth Lucas Chesla. And this is a fictionalized-ish account of the author's father's life and his death in the 1956 Hungarian Revolution. It's a hybrid novel, so it weaves together stories and poems and historical documents, a memoir, and historical facts. And to quote from the blurb, it says, "From the history of Transylvania, where her father was born, to the first shots fired on the peaceful protesters at Parliament, to the history of the Molotov cocktail, the freedom fighters' chief weapon against Soviet tanks. Chesla explores the causes and consequences of the revolution in the hope of keeping their memories and their fight alive." From New York Review Books are two books from Diana Athill, and these are two books that have been published simultaneously. They're both originally published in the 1960s. The first is the only novel that Diana Athill ever wrote. It's called Don't Look at Me Like That. And then also they're publishing Athill's first memoir, which is called Instead of a Letter. And the novel is about a character named Meg Bailey, who is coming of age in the mid-1940s and finds herself feeling out of place everywhere she goes, basically. Her father's parsonage, at her boarding school, with her friends, and at home. So she graduates from school and moves to a London boarding house and finally starts to feel a little bit like she's at home, but finds that her ties to the past are not so easily severed. And then in the memoir, called Instead of a Letter, Athill tries to answer, what have I lived for? And she recalls her childhood and university days during World War II. And Athill had a very distinguished career as an editor and ended up writing 7 memoirs in total. And in New York Times Book Review, Athill's style is described as clearly the style of an editor. And the review describes her writing style as taut and briskly paced, precision cut, and ruthlessly economical. From Black Lawrence Press is a novel called Down Here We Come Up by Sarah Johnson Allen. And this is the story of 3 women all living together. And it says, from her deathbed, con artist Jackie Jessup lures home her estranged 26-year-old daughter, Katie Jessup. Once she's at home with her mother, Kate meets a former teacher named Maribel Reyes, who is separated from her family. None of these women trust each other, and they do have a chance to get back what each has lost, but they must rely on each other to hatch a perilous plan that Kate doubts could ever work. She knows to distrust the motives behind any of her mother's plans. Something unseen is smoldering underneath the surface. Kate just needs to figure it out. From Fitzcarraldo Editions is a nonfiction book called Sleepless. And this is by Marie Darrieussecq, and it's translated by Penny Houston. And this is about the author's journey with sleeplessness. She's been plagued by insomnia for 20 years, and here she dives into the causes, implications, consequences and tried remedies for her sleeplessness. But what I think is most interesting is she then also considers the insomnia of other writers, famous writers, such as Marcel Proust and Virginia Woolf. And I think that sounds absolutely fascinating. So it says it's a fascinating combination of memoir and criticism. From Biblioasis is a book called The Art of Libromancy. This is by Josh Cook, who's a bookseller at Porterhouse Books in Boston. I pre-ordered this book and I am loving it so much. I'm going to do a whole separate video about it. I'll briefly share a couple sentences here about this book. So it says, if books are important to you because you're a reader or a writer, then how books are sold should be important to you as well. If it matters to you that your vegetables are organic, your clothes are made without child labor, your beer brewed without a culture of misogyny, then it should matter how books are made and sold to you. This is about book selling. It's also about publishing. It's also very much about reading and buying books. It's fascinating and I'm loving it and I can't wait to share more. From Upswell Publishing, another Australian press, is Trust, a Fractured Fable. This is a memoir and a personal detective story that dives into a relationship that was destroyed by betrayal. So this is the story of a person called Iris Ripley, who was a fraudster and a con man. And I believe from the description, the author might have been in a relationship with this Iris Ripley and might have also been conned by this Iris Ripley. So it is a very personal investigation into this fraudster, but it's also a deeper investigation of what it means to trust, why we trust, and what happens when trust is betrayed. From Other Press is a novel called Galore by Michael Crummy, and this was first published in 2009. This is an award-winning re-release of what sounds like a remarkable otherworldly novel. I'm going to read the description from their website. When a whale beaches itself on the shore of the remote coastal town of Paradise Deep, the last thing any of the townspeople expect to find inside it is a man, silent and reeking of fish, but remarkably alive. The discovery of this mysterious person, soon christened as Judah, sets the town scrambling for answers as its most prominent citizens weigh in on whether he is man or beast, blessing or curse, miracle or demon. And it sounds like the town is already full of unusual characters, and then they add this guy in from the whale. And the novel then follows these characters and families across 2 centuries. And it says it's sprawling and intimate, stark and fantastical. Galore is a novel about the power of stories to shape and sustain us. From Norton is a cookbook called Company, The Radically Casual Art of Cooking for Others. And this is by Amy Thielen. I feature mostly fiction on this channel because that is my obsession. But what you might not be aware of is that my other almost equal obsession is with cookbooks. And Amy Thielen is a chef and cookbook writer who I have followed for a really long time. I love her cookbook, The New Midwestern Table, and I love her Instagram. She lives in northern Minnesota, and her cooking practice is really tied to that region and to what she grows on her own land, and it's just so beautiful. Her cooking is just gorgeous. And so she has this new cookbook that is all about helping you rethink the way you entertain. So helping your gatherings be less formal, but more frequent and more fun. So it includes a year of inventive recipes and 20 different menus. So I'll definitely be checking this out because I adore her cooking. And then finally, from House of Anansi is a novel called Not That Kind of Place by Michael Melgard. And the phrase that caught my eye when I got an email from the publisher about this book was literary anti-mystery. Put anti in front of any fiction genre and it will automatically catch my eye. Because while I love pretty much any and every genre of fiction, what I especially love are authors who subvert things like genre. So this is the story of David, who lives in a small town and his mother has recently died. David is an adult. His mother has recently died, and his sister Laura disappeared 20 years before. So one day a reporter arrives on David's doorstep, eager to dig into David's sister Laura's disappearance and unsolved murder. And David has to come to terms with his past as he realizes that his mother really sheltered him from years of a long line of journalists and amateur sleuths trying to dig into Laura's disappearance and murder. And it's described as a compelling exploration of our obsession with true crime stories. So that's all the books I have for you. I actually have a ton more that I just don't have time to share with you, and this is getting too long. So sometimes I find a lot of poetry collections, but then find it too hard to describe them without having read them. So I end up like kind of debating whether to include them or not. But if you are interested in me listing more poetry collections here, please let me know and I will incorporate them more throughout these lists. But just let me know in the comments if you are interested, especially in poetry collections. What am I reading right now? I already told you about The Art of Libracy, which I'm reading and just like flying through. Smells good. Flying through this book. It is wonderful. I will tell you more about it later. But I am also flying through now that I'm not trying to read this at the lake and just reading, in a normal spot. To the Lake by Jana Wagner, translated by Maria Wiltshire, and this is published by Deep Vellum. It was written in 2011, so before COVID, but it's the story of a horrible, extremely deadly flu epidemic sweeping Russia and one family trying to escape the suburbs of Moscow up to a remote lake. And it's telling their journey like through the wintry roads of just trying to get to this lake. And it's awesome. I will talk more about this later too. It's very gripping. It's really dives into the characters and their dynamics and family dynamics and stranger dynamics, and really good. Loving this one. So that's what I've been reading lately. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you so much for joining me for this long list of awesome books. My name is Sarah, and I'll see you next time. Bye.